Okay, let's make a start. Firstly, welcome everybody, and thank you for taking the time this afternoon to join us. It's a climate focus event which we started well over a year ago. We've had some fascinating discussions. Obviously, we were right in the middle of a time where we're mourning the loss of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and I know it's challenging for people, but also it's a time to just reflect on her life of service and her enormous humility, and to take time to consider King Charles, what he's going to, having lost his mum, but also the way he's started the job with such dignity and decency. It's been a real honour to get to know him as Duke of Cornwall, and now obviously King Charles. And I think we can feel privileged that we've got a king who has the same commitment to public service that Her Majesty the Queen did. This afternoon, we're looking at community heating and how we can use renewable energy in a community, hopefully then to make our homes more efficient and rely less on fossil fuels and also hikes in prices. And we've got some really interesting speakers. We've got the National Trust, Ian and Eloise, speaking about what they're hoping to do in west of Cornwall. And we've got Lisa from Kenza Utilities, again, looking at some of the work they're doing in other parts of Cornwall. And we're going to start with Lisa. So Lisa, do feel free to introduce yourself, a little bit about the organisation you represent, and both past and present, and your ambition, and some of the challenges ahead, and also the relationship you have. I think we'll all be interested in the relationship you have with the general public, because obviously you need buy-in from residents to actually make your community heating system work, and that'd be true of you, Ian and Eloise. So Lisa, we'll hand over to you, and then when you finish, I'll go straight to Ian and Eloise, and then we'll take some questions. So everybody and anybody, you're welcome to put questions and who you are in the chat function, but we won't come to them until after the presentation. So thank you very much, and over to you, Lisa. Thank you.
So I've got some slides. I may skip a few of them as we go along. Right, can I just ask, can you all see my first slide properly?
Yes, you can. Yeah.
So my name's Lisa Trezida. I'm Director of Business Development for Kenza Utilities, which is part of the Kenza Group. We are a Cornish company, and I'm sat in our brand new office, which is above our factory in Mount Wellington, which is just a few miles out of St. Day. Now I'm gonna do a very quick overview of what a heat pump is, so that you've all got an idea of what it is that we do. So in the factory beneath me right now, Kenza staff are building ground source heat pumps, and you can see on your screen roughly what that is, what the technology is, and actually this refrigeration circuit here, the cycle. You all have one of those in your house now. It's very much the same technology that you've got in your fridge, but we use it in a different way to extract heat from the ground and put that around the home, rather than taking heat out of your fridge and putting it into the kitchen. It's exactly the same technology. It's very simple, and it can provide all of the heating and hot water for your house now without the need for any fossil fuels. We're not burning anything in the house. It just runs on electricity and compresses low-grade heat that it takes from the ground into a higher temperature to use in the house. And it's also the same technology as in an air source heat pump, but instead of taking the heat from the air, we take heat from the ground. And I was asked to mention a couple of the myths that you may have heard about heat pumps. The first one being that you have to have a really well insulated home in order to have a heat pump. A recent study from the government determined that that was not so, and all houses in the UK are suitable for heat pumps now. You can, however, save a huge amount of energy by insulating your house, and that doesn't mean that you've got to do that in order to have a heat pump. You should be doing that now, no matter what kind of heating you've already got in your house. So if you've got gas heating now, it might be quite cheap to run because gas prices are relatively low, but you're still losing lots of heat that you could otherwise save. So it's a sort of a basic building maintenance task to reduce how much heat your building is losing, and that will save you money as well as help the environment. It's well worth doing in preparation for a heat pump because it's going to save you money, but you don't have to do it. Another thing that we hear complaints about a lot of the time is that you need much bigger radiators to run a heat pump. So the reason that heat pumps can be very highly efficient is that we run the heating at a much lower temperature than you would normally have in your house with a gas boiler. We tend to design the system to run at between 45 and 50 degrees Celsius on the radiator, and that's compared to the standard 75 degrees Celsius that tends to be designed into a fossil fuel heating system. But the truth is that your gas boiler should be running at a much lower temperature anyway. So if you've got a modern condensing boiler, and all boilers sold now have to be condensing boilers, it should actually be running at more like 60 degrees Celsius, or preferably even lower, in order to get you a good high efficiency on the gas boiler and for it to condense the way it's meant to. So you shouldn't actually need much larger radiators with a heat pump. You should be able to use very similar size radiators as to what you currently have with a gas boiler. But actually most systems are not really installed properly now. So a little bit about our company. Kenza Utilities is the newest part of the Kenza Group. We've currently got 5 members of staff, and that's gone up from the 1 that was me on my own at the beginning of this year. The Kenza Group started over 20 years ago in Cornwall with a couple of guys building heat pumps in a garage. We've now got over 165 employees. We are the UK's only manufacturer of ground source heat pumps, and we have over 40% of the UK market. We are the UK lead for ground source heat pumps. And that is really quite a fantastic achievement for a Cornish company. At the beginning of Kenza's life, we were building ground source heat pumps for fancy self-build properties where people had quite a lot of money to spare. They wanted the best, they wanted sustainable, and it worked. And we have some really great technology. But then we decided to break into a bigger market. So the next big market for Kenza was social housing retrofit. And in order to make that work, Kenza created Kenza Contracting, which is the installation side of the company. And they'll come into a large landlord or new build developer, and they'll do everything from survey to design, all the way through installation and to commissioning. And that means that once the whole system is installed, if anything is wrong, there's a single point of contact. So you don't have to go back to each of the different people that was involved in that process and try and work out what went wrong and where, because that was one of the biggest barriers to uptake of heat pumps back in the early 2000s. From that social housing retrofit, we built up the company to do some really quite large engineering projects, and Kenza did over 400 flats in Enfield. So the high-rise flats that you can see in the picture there, every single one of those has a small shoebox heat pump inside it. Now, unfortunately, the shoebox heat pump is not quite the size of a shoebox. It's actually considerably larger than that, but it is the smallest one on the market at the moment. And that means that it's cheaper, more affordable, and easier to put into smaller buildings. The new build market took off really quite well because of the increased pressure on developers to reduce the energy used by the buildings that they create. And so we sell quite a lot into that market. The future market for Kenza is the existing homes in the UK now. So currently we have over 29 million homes in the UK. And if we're to reach our net zero targets in 2050, we have to find a way to decarbonise those. And that is the point of Kenza Utilities. So the net zero ambition in the UK, one of the biggest challenges we have is the decarbonisation of heating. And you can see here what a massive difference we need to make to how we heat our homes to achieve that much lower target. About 30% of UK's emissions are related to heating of domestic properties. So it really is a big challenge, especially with the number of fossil fuel boilers that are out there now. Electrification of heat is the way to go, but we're still quite a long way off the numbers that are required to meet that target. So the biggest barrier that we have in achieving that is the really low price of gas and gas boilers. And it's actually something that I think as Brits we should be quite proud of. We rolled out a fantastic gas network. We've managed to reduce the cost of gas boilers for people. And so a great number of homes are heated relatively cheaply. Ground source heat pumps are the most efficient heating technology out there. And that means that they'll have the least impact on our electricity grid if we roll them out in high density across the UK. But the upfront capital cost of installing them is one of the biggest barriers. And a third of that cost is related to the ground array infrastructure that we install to run that heat pump. But the ground array infrastructure lasts for 100 years. So we're looking at different ways of financing that aspect of it so that people don't have to foot that big upfront bill. The Kenza vision is for a new type of district heating, but one that mimics the gas network that we already have in the UK. Instead of a gas boiler in every home, each home would have a ground source heat pump in it. It doesn't have to be one that we build. It could be any heat pump that could be connected to this. The point is to make it much easier for individuals to take up renewable heating when their boiler breaks. We'd have to do this street by street. We'd have to come along and install enough ground array infrastructure to serve those heat pumps at the start. It has to be split ownership. People can't all afford to pay for that really long-term infrastructure all at once and at the speed required. We have already seen loads of businesses looking to invest in this infrastructure, and we already have competition in this market now since we began Heat the Streets, which we're really happy about because it actually increases the trust in the technology if more companies are trying to push this solution. So Heat the Streets, this is our demonstration of the Kenza vision. I wrote a funding application to ERDF back in 2020, which was, I believe it was during COVID. We were successful in securing £6.2 million of funding from the EU to support our vision of split ownership ground source heat pump installations being installed street by street. Now for this particular project, these are the terms, and once we move away from such high levels of grant funding, these values will change and the terms will change. But at the moment, it really supports us to be able to demonstrate this and de-risk private investment in this kind of business model. So we've got 3 market sectors in Heat the Streets, and these are across the whole of Cornwall. We've got new builds developers. We currently have 3 sites, one of which is nearing completion now. For those, they're paying something towards the upfront cost of the heating system, and they're getting a ground source heat pump for the same price as air source. But the benefit is there are lower running costs with ground source because it's more efficient, and they don't have to worry about an ugly piece of kit stuck on the outside of the building. each home that has this ground source heat pump will pay us £12.50 per month as a standing charge for using that ground array infrastructure, and that's for a period of 20 years. For social housing, again, the landlord gets the benefit of ground source heat pump at the cost of air source, and they pay £8.50 per month standing charge for every property that's included. In this instance, it'll be the landlord that will be paying us so that tenants don't see a sudden hike in their rental cost. But the benefit to them is that if a tenant decides to take up their right to buy that house, they don't have to work out how to split responsibility of the shared infrastructure in that area, because we have seen previously that it's one of the barriers for social housing landlords, particularly in areas with housing, not flats, where people quite frequently take up their right to buy. And then the most exciting part of this project for us is the private retrofit. And the focus for this is a village called Stithians, which is just 4 miles from here. So rather fantastically, we'll be building the heat pumps in this building, shipping them 4 miles and installing them in private households. We're not looking for any upfront cost from those households, because we wouldn't be able to get people to agree to do this, to possibly borrow the money in the time scale that we have to deliver the project. But each of those is committing to a higher monthly cost to pay us back some of that investment. And they also agree to pass on that monthly cost when they sell their home. So in the UK, the average in each property, the average time people spend is about 7 years. So you can imagine that not many people are going to want to pay for the 100-year life of this infrastructure. And it works really quite well to pass on the responsibility of that, as well as the benefit of it, when you sell a house. Now, the plan for Heat the Streets was that we would be finishing installations in winter this year. As a project manager, I built in 6 months of float because I know exactly how these things go and exactly what I thought happened, and we're doing everything right towards the end of the project. Now, this is actually fairly standard for this type of R&D project. We're still hoping to get some really good, well, not hoping, we are still going to get some really good outcomes for this project, and things are going really well now. But it was to be expected that things would drift a bit. And that's because we're doing something that is really quite unusual and very much ahead of the market. I'm not going to dwell on this bit too much, because this is actually kind of business as usual for Kenza. This photograph is the drill rig at one of the new build sites. We get to put that drill rig on site before the building goes up, drill our holes. As you can see, it's quite messy, as you can imagine. It's really quite noisy. So getting it done before the rest of the work, it works really well. It's a bit unfortunate that I'm talking to you about this project this week, because if it were in 2 weeks' time, I'd be able to show you a whole load of pictures of our works in this particular street. So we are in fact breaking ground in Hendra Close in Stithians next week. The work begins there on Tuesday. We're very excited about it. We've got a launch event on Friday where people will be able to come along and see the drill rigs. If any of you are interested in that, if you could drop me a line so that we can put your name down, that would be fine. And like I said, every one of these is agreeing to a 20-year lease agreement for the ground array. In future, that's actually going to be 40 years. And that reflects the standard in a district heating scheme. And that's the term over which we would be borrowing private finance to make this happen in future. And you mentioned the response that we've had from the local community. We have had incredibly high uptake for this. We opened it up to the whole village. We opened up registrations of interest for the whole village. We had over 270 people request to take part in this project before we narrowed it down to the particular streets that we're actually going to work in. So we've had to disappoint a huge number of people. We've got funding for about a quarter of those in the private retrofits. And we've actually been approached by other communities, other villages in the area and other villages around the country to see if we can repeat this in their area, because it's amazing how many people are really interested in trying to decarbonize their properties themselves. And it's difficult to do it on your own, and it needs this kind of level of organization. But if that organization is there, people are very interested in taking up the opportunity. In this particular street, we offered the ground source heat pumps to 12 of the buildings. We've had to rule a couple of them out. And one person dropped out because she's trying to sell the home now. A couple of others, there were structural issues that we didn't want to get involved with, but every other one is going ahead. So it's phenomenal, the uptake that we've had. More exciting than Hendra Close is a housing estate within the village, which is mixed social housing retrofit and private retrofit. And in this area, we're planning on installing the ground array infrastructure in the public highway. And although it seems like a sensible and straightforward thing to do, this is actually incredibly difficult and not something that we ever normally do. Normally, with a new build development, we would put that ground array infrastructure in before the road was laid. And it's much easier there because you have a single landowner. It's far more complex when you're working in the highway in a retrofit setting. And you can see here the level of the design. Each one of these blue dots is a connection. Each cross is a borehole, and each red point is a stop valve going to the house, so that we can isolate parts of this network in future if anything were to go wrong, and allow other people to keep accessing the heat. Without working in the road here, we would not be able to heat every single house with a ground source heat pump, because there simply isn't the land available to install the ground array otherwise. And in many areas around the UK, this would be the only way to install renewable heating other than a high temperature district heat network. If you think of rows of terraced houses, which perhaps don't have gardens at the back or have very small gardens, no garden at the front, you can't necessarily install an air source heat pump because it would be too close to the living areas of other people, and you have issues with noise. One of the biggest issues we have here is fuel prices. So if we're to move this offer into an area that's on gas, and the reason we picked Stithians is one of the reasons is that it's an off gas area, so it's much easier to convince people to ditch their oil boiler because they're quite expensive to run. But where you've got gas and you've got particularly low prices, it's another story completely. And as you can see here, the green levies, which are meant to support this kind of installation of renewable heating, in some ways they disincentivize that because it's added to your electricity bill. So you can see here, and these are slightly old figures, it's probably a little bit different today, but at this point, the energy company obligation, which pays for investment in renewable technologies, accounts for 25% of that electricity bill. Now, if that was moved to gas, it would actually incentivize people to consider changing away from that high carbon fuel and onto something that's better for our environment. But actually what we've got to do is convince people to pay for their renewable heating, lose their low cost fuel, and then pay a bit more on their electricity bill. It's almost like a penalty. It's really not helping the situation. After we started Heat the Streets, the government launched the Heat Pump Ready programme. And I'm absolutely amazed to be able to tell you that Kenza is involved in 4 out of 11 of the projects that were successful in the Stream 1. And the point of this programme is to look at how to achieve high density deployment of heat pumps in domestic homes in the UK that are currently on gas. And I think it says something about the business models that are available to us for decarbonising properties that we were so successful in this particular programme. Kenza was also successful in a Stream 2 bid because we made an application for a brand new heat pump, and it's one that breaks that refrigeration cycle that I showed you at the beginning of the slides. For the first time since about, I think it's 1880, when the original patent for the refrigeration cycle went in, we're making a change to it. And we have a technology that is so different from a typical heat pump that we can't even test it as a heat pump. It just doesn't work, but it's got built-in energy storage, and it will be the future of heating. This slide here, it's fairly ugly. I stole it off somebody else. This is what we use when we go to speak to new build developers now. So this is actually our commercial offer to new build developers now. We can offer already the split ownership option to new build, where we're offering them ground source heating at the price of air source, which benefits them in many ways. And then we're spreading that long-term cost of the infrastructure over a period of 40 years, but it's actually still affordable compared to ground source. So we're not making people worse off when we make this offer. We've got a lot of interest in this with some of the really big developers across the UK, and it's the whole purpose of Kenza Utilities is to drive that ground source heat pump market to increase the sales for Kenza heat pumps, which will grow the business in Cornwall. Now, if any of you are interested in some of the things that we've talked about here, Kenza won a couple of awards recently for their Green Streets site. So if you want to have a look at that, you're more than welcome. I can also highly recommend having a look at our YouTube video of a virtual site tour, and you can see there what steps are required for retrofitting ground source heat pumps into a property. It's a really fantastic video. So that's the end of my slideshow. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm crossing myself now because I've got a question I'm desperate to ask you, and I have to wait till the end. And Ian, so I hand over to you, and then I'll let you introduce Eloise. I assume it's the other way around. Thank you ever so much, Lisa. That's really interesting, fascinating. And I do get your point about how we incentivize fossil fuel heating at the moment. Ian, over to you, sir.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you all. So I'm Ian Marsh. I work for the National Trust. I'm the General Manager down in West Cornwall, and also joined by Eloise Travis from Cornwall Council, who's Senior Low Carbon Investment Officer, and we're working together on this project looking at mine water heating. So I've got just a couple of slides, so not that familiar with Zoom, but I'll try and share my screen. Oh, it's asking me to permission.
Well, can you give Ian permission to do that?
Yep, 1 second. It should be enabled.
Let's try that. Okay, how's that? Is that
brilliant? That's great, thanks.
Right. Okay, so yeah, as I said, two of us, both in the project, but also one of the other key project partners is Live West as well, involved in this from the housing company, social housing company. So there's 3 organisations very much involved, along with Pending Community Heritage Trust, who run Geevor as well. They take a lease from Cornwall Council. and I have to say, Eloise has done all of the sort of hard work on this project as well, in terms of the grant bids, and currently also looking at the tenders that are going to go out now for the study. But just as a kind of quick introduction to the project and how it came about. So I first heard about the potential for mine water heating from the studies that are going on in Glasgow. They're investigating the potential of the former coal mines that underlie the city. And they've set up a British Geological Survey station there to look at the data from that. So that's an interesting project that's going on up there. But there's also precedent there in the Netherlands as well, where there's an existing scheme that heats 350 houses and local businesses. And interestingly, as well as heating, they can also provide cooling in the summer there as well. So there's some working schemes. And in the UK, there's an existing scheme as well in Gateshead, again using coal mines, flooded coal mines, and it's a wine warehouse, Lanchester Wines, up in Gateshead, and they have heat pumps. It was an interesting and useful introduction from Lisa actually on the heat pump technology and how it works, because they use heat pumps that are tied into the flooded mines, and they are providing the right temperature to store wines there in a very large wine warehouse. So there is some existing schemes there. The technology is working. I think Kenza might heat their offices in this way as well, from what I've heard. So there is some technology there already. So back in 2015, Cornwall Council commissioned Brewer Happold to look at the potential across Cornwall, and it was a strategic heat mapping study, and it identified the potential of district heat networks, mapped heat demand, heat opportunities, and also looked at where there was fuel poverty existing as well. And it highlighted several areas where the opportunities were greatest, and that included Geevor mine down in Pendeen in West Cornwall. And this is from the document from the study here. So 187 settlements in Cornwall, that's 32%. Have abandoned mines within 500 meters of them, which could provide a source of heating from the geothermally heated mine water. And the estimated temperature of the mine water varies significantly depending on the depth and location of the mine, from about 10 degrees up to about 47. However, it remains a significant resource, with 18% of mines having temperatures of above 20 degrees. So we got together as partners and wanted to look at the potential, and we successfully applied then to the Department for Business, Energy and the Industrial Strategy, to their Heat Network Delivery Unit, for a feasibility study. And that study is to explore the possibility of using that water in abandoned mine workings at Geevor, which is Cornwall Council owned, but also the Vant and Batalic, which are owned by the National Trust. So we were successfully getting £100,000. 67,000 of that comes from the funder. And as the three organisations, we have also then match funded and put in 11,000 each, so that the study can go ahead. So the study is going to look at the chemical and mineral content of the water. It's going to measure the temperatures at various depths, and it's going to assess the best configuration for extracting the heat from those mines. So it's likely that we'll be able to use a water source heat pump to take the heat from the water and transfer it into heat that can be used for local homes, businesses, and also obviously the Geevor, and as an organisation, National Trust, we have holiday cottages, we have cafes and commercial businesses, and we also have tenants living in housing in that area as well. So there's lots of use cases and demands for it. So I think this photo shows that it does get cold down west sometimes. So heat's very much needed. It's a remote area, that part of Cornwall, and it's not connected to mains gas. The nearest supply is around 7 kilometres away. And currently around 20% of households are in fuel poverty, and actually that figure is probably well out of date now, because it was before the shocking price rises that we've seen in energy. And most of those households rely on oil or on solid fuel or on electric heating. Many of the housing stock down there is old and solid wall construction, often granite buildings. And in many cases, they do require improvement to insulation as well as the upgraded heating. Live West key partners with us because they own 92 properties in the area, in the Pendine area, mainly the Lower Boscaswell estate. And I mentioned Geevor as well, and the National Trust's ownership on that area as well. But there's also wider opportunities, and a key part of this study is to provide some data and some inspiration as well to other places around Cornwall. We're well placed to explore and test this technology using the heat beneath our feet because of the large number of abandoned and flooded tin and copper mines that we have, and of course our geology that's dominated by granite. So we've got around 400 abandoned mines in Cornwall. Not all will be suitable for providing heat, but a good number hopefully will be. And it presents Cornwall, I think, with a great opportunity to provide low carbon heat to homes, businesses, and also as a charity. You know, we have some really stringent targets around cutting our carbon neutral by 2030. So heating National Trust as tenant cottages and all of our commercial premises, as well as our attractions, is really, really important and attractive to us. So the aims of the study then, so we're hoping to develop a clear set of recommendations at the end of the study. We want to base that on detailed technical and economic analysis. We want to know about the feasibility of developing a heat network scheme for the area from the flooded mine workings. And we want the study to be to enable us to determine whether to invest in progressing the scheme. We want recommendations that describe an initial scheme that's deliverable in the short term, and outline a vision for phased network expansion that can be achieved in the long term. So start small, but we also would like to scale up in the future very much. And we also want the recommendations to describe the next steps required by us to take the project through to commercialisation and construction. So we're hoping for all of that from the feasibility study. So just in terms of closing, I think that really, you know, it's an interesting photo here from I think around 1897 of that sort of Paul and Red Roof area. And it shows the heritage that we've got here in Cornwall, some of it now in the care of the National Trust. And I think it's a really interesting story as well, that Cornwall led the world in terms of the mining technology and exporting that around the world, but also, you know, that technology did produce its fair share of carbon emissions itself as well, and also has played a part in the start of the Industrial Revolution. And it's a really interesting story now, if we can use some of that legacy to provide carbon neutral heating and to actually try and reduce our reliance on carbon and fossil fuel. As someone who works in heritage, that's also a fantastic story for me as well. So really happy to take any questions, but that's a summary of our project and where we are.
Thank you, Ian, and apologies to Eloise because I introduced you as from the National Trust. I didn't realise that, and welcome. So I am going to, so please, anybody who wants to, do comment or put a question in the chat and let us know who you are. But I got the first question I'm going to ask for Kenza, actually for Lisa. So I tried looking at ground source heat where I moved to a new mill, and I was told, I was pushed back by, I'm going to say Western Power Distribution, who said that I would need a 3-phase supply, which would cost an awful lot of money because I tend to live out in a bit of sticks on the end of a power supply. Is that a myth? Is that false or not? This idea that properties will need to be upgraded to 3-phase. They're putting 3-phase in new buildings anyway. But you talked about the existing stock. Is 3-phase power an issue for you?
It would be better if we had 3-phase everywhere, because it's not really just about heat pumps. It's not just electrification of heat. More and more people are getting electric vehicles, and actually at a higher rate than people are buying heat pumps. So if you think most people are going to want to have both of those things in future, we do need to upgrade the network. And we would need to upgrade the network in order to electrify heat across the UK. Luckily, all of the Kenza heat pumps up to the 3-phase model are connect and notify. What that means is you could go out now, you could buy yourself a Kenza heat pump and have it installed, and then tell WPD, and they would be obliged to come out and sort out your connection. So it's not impossible to do it. And the benefit of ground source is that the very high efficiencies mean that there is less impact on that network. And that new model that I mentioned, the one that is in R&D now, has built-in energy storage for space heating and hot water. So we're all quite accustomed to storing heating in our hot water cylinders. This one, actually, you can store your space heating requirement as well. So you would be able to generate that energy, the heat energy overnight, and store it for use in the day. And that means that you don't have to have quite the same capacity on the network, because you could move people's energy use around to when there's a bit less.
I agree. That is helpful, because you referred to, and that's why I mentioned it, you referred to some of the myths around, and the 3-phase of it. I always wondered whether that was really actually that's the bigger problem as some suggest. So that's brilliant, thank you. Let's see what Pippa, I don't know if we've got people there waiting to ask questions, do we?
Martin Tallis has an interesting comment. I don't know if you wanted to enlarge on that, Martin. Hello, are you there?
Sorry, I'm muting. I didn't. I don't think there's anything more to say. I've had a heat pump for 10 years now, so it was before you had to notify the network operators trawling. But yeah, three-phase ones are needed for bigger work, but household size heat pump is single phase is normal.
Yeah, single phase is normal for our range of heat pumps up to 17 kilowatt, and that's big. And that's really quite a big heat pump, but it is actually still a domestic one. The point is more that in future, where you've got an electric vehicle and a heat pump, you're pushing it a bit, and it's 3-phase is fairly normal across other parts of Europe, and WPD is moving towards that as standard now. That's their intention, for it to be standard in future.
My electric car uses half the power of the heat pump. Heat pump uses about 4,000 kilowatt hours a year, and the electric car uses about 2.
It depends how much you use it. A normal house could use up to 10,000 kilowatt hours of heat across the year, or more actually. Yeah. The
issue for me seemed to be that it was ground source that presented a problem, because, and I'm talking all like, it was a conversation I had in a garden. It wasn't written down or anything, but it was something to do with ground source and the way that I'm not an electrician, but you're shaking your head, Lisa, so it's just a myth, and we should move on and get out.
It's not quite a myth. Ground source is the most efficient type of heating you can get. The connect and notify standard is to do with the, I'm going to get this horribly wrong, and I'm sure, but the kind of the frequency at which the heat pump uses the electricity. So you have to go through a testing process to have it approved. It's not just about the capacity of the heat pump. So it could be that if you mentioned a different model, that would have been an issue on the network, and you would have had to pay the upgrade cost. It's not to do with being ground source, because it's more efficient than air source. It's more efficient than storage heaters. But yeah, it's not simple, and it might not be entirely wrong.
But that's why you're here, to assess people's homes and provide the solution, so we don't have to get into muddle as I just did. So if there's no one else asking questions, I've got another one, but this time for both of you. The government moved away from the renewable heat incentive April of this year to now this, I think, basically a grant. but it sounds to me from you, Lisa, and possibly I know we're a bit ahead of the game for you, Ian, is that probably isn't relevant now. The grant that the government is offering. What you're proposing.
I believe it is relevant. What I would like would be for us to find private finance to get the ground array infrastructure into streets around Britain, and for individuals to be able to access a grant, something like the boiler upgrade scheme, to support the improvements required in their house. You know, the water cylinder, the heat pump itself. That would actually work quite well. The boiler upgrade scheme is, however, a bit of an issue in the way that it favours air source heat pumps, which have a higher demand on the electrical grid. And the reason it does that is that that they develop the policy based on a 15-year ownership cost. Now, when we're looking at solutions to take us through past 2050, 15 years is not going to do it. And if you look at a period of 40 years or more, ground source heat pump is it's much lower ownership cost to households, because the heat pumps last longer because you've kept them in your house. They don't require servicing. They don't break down loads because they're indoors, and they use less power. So you have to do less upgrades to the national grid. So I'm not a fan of the boiler upgrade scheme, but I do think that we could do with some schemes in future. I would, however, prefer it if they didn't support sporadic deployment of heat pumps, which is far harder for WPD to keep up with, because you can't plan it. There's no planning in that. It's just when people can afford it and they feel it's the right time for them, they'd hop in.
Yeah, sporadic is a good word to use for government grants and the way it's thought through. You're being very diplomatic.
Right.
Ian, I don't know if you want to say anything, but I've got a better question for you, Ian, and I am not hugging it. As soon as questions come in, I'll shut up. 400 abandoned mines. Are you in conflict with the passion for lithium?
Well, yeah, I mean, who knows? I think that, you know, there's obviously lots of exploration going on. You know, it's been a side consideration to, you know, we've had as a project team, that if we're extracting the water to surface and taking heat from it, should we also look and see if there's lithium there? I think it sounds like it's unlikely to be there in any sort of commercial quantity. I think there's more than enough flooded mine workings to go around, though, that, you know, we wouldn't anticipate ever really being drained to that extent. I don't know what you think, Eloise, but I think there's certainly the areas we're looking at, you know, lithium, as far as I know, there's been no sort of exploration up to now.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ian. There's nothing that I'm aware of. I think most of the lithium exploration is looking at their own drilling, or at the deep geothermal sites as well. So, but it's certainly something we need to bear in mind for our project.
Yeah, and if it wants to become a problem, it's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
Okay, and
sorry.
maybe it can work in tandem. And, you know, one of the things is if Cornish Lithium or other companies are extracting water to surface with lithium in it, is there heat in that you know, could potentially be used as well? So we were talking about lithium as a side product of it, but maybe heat is also a side product of that industry as well.
Yeah, it's an amazing space. I mean, there's a lot of conversation going on in Parliament and across Cornwall on this kind of broader subject for a little while now. And it's just so fascinating the potential. Did we have a question pop up then? Sorry,
Yes.
Yeah, marvellous. They're all trying to get me to shut up. Okay, so Pippa, I'll leave this one to you to ask.
John C, are we sure we're looking at true whole life costs? Do you want to come in on that, John? Hello? John?
While we're waiting for John, Western Power Distribution is the definition or the explanation for WPD. We apologise.
Well, let's go back to Lucy Isaac for a moment. Hello, Lucy. Lucy Isaacson. Do you want to join this conversation, talking about vehicle to grid?
Hi, Pip. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Lucy.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to when you were talking before about all the pressures on that electricity, when we eventually have vehicle to grid where we can store our energy in the car, you know, say we've got solar and then we can store it in our car and then we can draw from that, will that help the situation, is what I wanted to ask.
In relation to this heating, this community heating.
Yeah. So just about 5 minutes ago, when we're saying, you know, it sort of challenges, there's so much draw on it, and electric cars as well. I think when you know, Nissan are going to bring out about 30 models vehicle to grid over the next year and a half when we get the lithium out of the ground and everything else. So I wanted to ask Kenza, really, will that help those discussions earlier?
Yeah, I think it does help. There are lots of different smart controls for homes now that are starting to be developed, that we're, you know, seeing coming into the market, that can consider, you know, when you turn your heating on, whether it's going to preheat using the electricity from solar, you know, and domestic batteries, and you could just add into the mix when you're going to be charging your car and when you're going to be drawing from the car if that's required. My only slight concern is that every cycle on that battery costs you money. It, you know, it reduces the value of that battery because you have a limited number of times that you can charge and discharge any kind of battery. So unless you've got a lease model, you'd want to think quite hard about whether it's good value to you as an individual to be doing that to your car.
Can I just add to that, though? I think we've got to be a bit careful, just on my side, that when we're talking about EVs, the first thing people go, oh, the battery, you can't buy an EV, but it's so dated to say that. I'm not saying what you're just saying is, but to have that concept. And, you know, I'm in my 7th year of an electric vehicle, but in the first few years, about 5 years ago, St Austell fleet is a Nissan Leaf fleet. And Nissan took their batteries and said, we don't have this practical experience. Can we take all your batteries and test them? After they've been hammering, charging continually as taxis. And I can't remember, so don't quote me. It's either 97 or 96% efficient they were after 5 years. So I think we've got to be really, really careful, because a lot of other cars will just fall to pieces on other elements. But I don't think batteries a problem for EV, but not knocking what you said.
That's an interesting point, Lucy. When I met with Smart Energy UK some time ago, when we were looking at getting every home, or rather 20 million homes, to have, I think it was 20 million smart meters by 2020. I don't think we got anywhere near that. Their vision was electric cars, heat pumps, and some sort of solar panel, renewable energy, sorry, so that that house could top up the battery and then draw it out when it needed. And they said the 3 items, the air source or other heat source, the solar, and the battery on the car, the electric car, was the dream house to be living in. And then all controlled or either managed by a smart meter, including all your device, all your the white goods that could actually be timed when the energy was available. So it was a fascinating conversation. We're probably not as far away from that now as we were then, obviously. But it is be really interesting to see how that evolves. Certainly changed the construction industry in how we build the homes, which is a little bit of my background. Where else? Where are we, Pippa? Have we got other questions coming in?
I don't think we have. Well, can I just ask a question, which is about smart meters? Which is, our house is granite, and we asked Octopus if we could have one, and they said they're not fitting them down here at the moment. But I don't think it would work even if they did. Can anybody?
I think I can answer that. I can answer it, but I'll be corrected. So the SMET or the first generation of smart meters, that would be true.
Yeah.
But the new ones which are being rolled out now, that wouldn't be the case.
They would cope.
And the reason energy companies aren't fitting them with the same pace that they were is the lack of engineers. They just can't get the engineers to do it. I'm not aware of any other reason of why that's not happened. But the new generation ones are not concerned about how your building is built. If anyone knows differently, do tell me. But we got into a lot of debate about it when the government were hell-bent on driving it forward on the old the first generation smart meter, which we knew would all have to be updated when the next generation came out.
Thank you.
I could probably get you. Can you do that, Alfie? We'll get you a library briefing on that from the House of Commons about where we are on that and whether
Excellent. Thank
whether
you.
they should be fitted wherever you live. It's the engineers seem to be the problem.
Yeah.
That's we're finding, lack of engineers. Any other? Let's not labour this. I mean, it's been really fascinating, and I'd like to sign up, but I don't live in a urban area with a mine underneath me. But,
Everywhere has a mine
John
underneath.
James is wanting to come in. Now look, John James, he's the man. He's got a smart meter.
He's
It
got a
works.
smart meter,
Literally.
well, there you go.
And he found an engineer. Well done, John. Brilliant. Well, there are some good things going on. I think there's an event in Chasewater coming up. Do you know about this one, Pippa?
I don't know.
Around they're promoting, I think it's community heating. I'll find out the information and send it around. I got the details like yesterday.
Lucy wants to share a quick bit of groovy news, which I'm sure you'd like to share.
I've just put it in the link there, and you might want to look at it another time. But I've just done net zero pathway with a firm in Loo, and they had to offset 170 tonnes. And I'm aware of a company that floods in Mevagissey, and upstream from that is a farmer, and sort of tackling these three things. So I said to the guys in Loo, why don't you pay for him to plant herbal ley to sequester your carbon that you need to offset and to hold the rain to stop matey down the road flooding? And they've just done it. They've just all made friends, and it's just a nice little close the loop. So I just wanted to share that. Told Radio Cornwall they had me in 10-minute interview, and then I overlaid pictures. So I've just put the link in there. It's just that it's really groovy and exciting. So I hope you don't mind me sharing.
Well done, Lucy. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a brilliant topic. I have that conversation with daffodil growers all of the time, where we tend to have a bit of flooding, usually north of uphill from Mousel. Thank you for that. Is there anything more you want to say, Lisa or Ian, about how we can get involved? We just need to look out. I mean, are you doing, for example, you're doing anything in Porthleven, Lisa? Because I know there's a lot of enthusiasm in Porthleven for this kind of heating.
Yeah, well, originally I wrote the application for Porthleven. And I wrote applications to ERDF and HNIP. So I had to bring in two different types of public funds, and each one of them wanted the other to approve it first. And it was such a massive project that everyone was a little bit nervous about funding it. And we got invited back to reapply for something smaller, and it was Stithians.
I wonder if shared prosperity might be the route now. Then I only asked because that one came on my desk right when I first got elected, and they were looking then at mains gas, and it was a wrong answer and too expensive, and so they moved on to some sort of community heating. There's a question from John James. We'll probably take this one before we finish. John, do you want to ask it?
Yes, I was just interested as a private householder, and what would be the typical cost of a ground source heat pump system installed if I just went to Kenza or some other installer privately? I mean, what kind of figure would one be looking at?
It varies massively depending on the situation. So if you've got loads of land, you could have a horizontal ground array instead of vertical drilling, and that would save you a huge amount of money. But typically it's somewhere between £20,000 and £35,000 for a retrofit. It's a lot of money. There's a £6,000 grant available now through the boiler upgrade scheme. But yeah, that's why we need to try and find other ways to help people get into it, because for retrofit, over a third of that cost is the ground array. And the internal system upgrades, so your radiators, pipe work and cylinder, all of that work you would have to do for an air source heat pump as well. The ground source heat pump itself is slightly cheaper than air source because you don't have an outdoor unit. And then the ground array itself is really very expensive.
Okay, thank you.
It's quite a bill to find. Brilliant. Well, let's leave it there. Let's keep an eye on what you're doing, though, Lisa and Ian and Eloise, because it's a fascinating subject. And I guess, Eloise, you'll have areas, you'll have other responsibilities elsewhere, and even different types of heating. Do you want to say a little bit about what you do? Because I'm afraid I have no idea who you were. I don't know that's true.
So yeah, I work in the Economy and Skills Service, Cornwall Council. So my responsibility is mainly around district heating. So something that your members might be particularly interested in is a feasibility study that we've just completed to connect the United Downs deep geothermal project to a new build development in Truro. So we're looking to pipe heat about 6 kilometres into Truro to serve about 3,000 properties in the hospital. So so that's a really exciting project that we're hoping to get some government grant funding on to start construction on in the next couple of years. So and hopefully, if that's successful, we've got other projects in the pipeline similar to that, and the mining project as well. So loads of opportunities for heating projects in Cornwall now.
Amazing. I think what makes it exciting is over the years we've seen a new piece of technology, and it takes a little bit of time to get it going, and then it just goes, doesn't it? And then it's just becomes normal, and we've got iPhones and iPads, and we just think, well, what was the big deal about? That needs to happen for heating, doesn't it? And this is what you're talking about now, needs to be absolutely the standard, probably even as 10, 15 years time.
Yeah, you just got to prove this technology with a few pilot projects, and then I think, yeah, you're right, it'll take off and
amazing.
Costs will come down.
I'm quite excited. I might be looking for a different job in a couple of years, so I'll go and dig holes in the ground. Let's leave it there. Ian, thanks ever so much. Eloise, lovely to meet you. And Lisa, thanks for your contribution. Good to hear the continuing story of Kenza, good Cornish company. If anyone wants to know more, can we share your details with people after this?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, great. So what we'll do, we'll send an email out with details of how you can get hold of these 3 individuals, and also I'll get this library briefing about whatever it was I was getting a library briefing about. Smart meters, sorry. But I can't actually remember what we're doing next time. Pippa, do you remember?
No, it was in your court, I think. After that, it was the health one. November is the health one, and you had a plan for next month. I can find out. I've got all the emails.
Don't make it look like I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, I don't know.
On my right, your left is Alfie. You'll remember Beth from last time. So Beth has moved on. She did a year in my office, and she moved on, which was a natural part of what she was doing. Alfie has succeeded her doing the same thing, and so he'll be the one who actually will know what's going on next time and communicate. So thank you ever so much, everybody. It's been lovely to see you again. We did have someone who's just joined, so they might have got the time wrong, and I apologise if that's you. I do genuinely apologise for that. And thanks ever so much, Ian, again, and Lisa and Eloise. Really fascinating, great subjects.
Thanks,
Brilliant.
everybody. That was just great. Yep.
Every success for what you're trying to do. Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
See you.